And the winner is...
Ha-ha! Oh, yeah! Robert Duvall!
This week we lost a true Hollywood legend and a good soul. Robert Duvall passed away on February 15th at his home in Middleburg, Virginia.
Robert Duvall, the man who once played as one of the most powerful characters in cinematic history, passed away at the age of 95. Not under the bright lights of Hollywood, but in the quiet stillness of an old Virginia farmhouse, with only his wife holding his hand in his final moments. But what shocked the nation was not just the loss of a legendary actor, it was what he left behind. A legacy that went far beyond fame, wealth, and unforgettable films. One that carried a weight so heavy, it left those closest to him quietly shattered. Robert Duvall stands as one of the most respected actors in the history of American cinema. He won an Academy Award and earned 7 nominations across a career that spanned generations. Audiences remember him as Tom Hagen, the calm and calculating consigliere in The Godfather. Others recall his larger-than-life presence as Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, or his quiet strength as a retired Texas Ranger in Lonesome Dove. For more than 70 years, he built a career grounded in authenticity, often portraying men of few words but immense weight. He became an icon, yet his real life could not have been further from the image most people associate with a Hollywood star. On the evening of February 15, 2026, Robert Duvall took his final breath at the age of 95. His passing did not happen in a Los Angeles hospital or behind the gates of a Beverly Hills mansion. It took place inside a 270-year-old Georgian stone farmhouse, set on 360 acres in Fauquier County, Virginia. In his final moments, the person holding his hand was his wife, Luciana Pedraza Duvall. There were no cameras, no publicists drafting statements, no Hollywood entourage filling the halls, just a wife, a quiet room, and a peaceful goodbye. It was the kind of ending that only a man who truly understood storytelling would choose for himself. Within hours, the news spread across every major network. CNN, NBC, PBS, and entertainment outlets around the world carried headlines announcing the death of the Oscar-winning actor at 95. The world began mourning a legend, but inside the Duvall home, something unusual happened. The family released a statement that caught many off guard. They asked for no official funeral, no formal gathering of Hollywood elites. Instead, they made a request so simple, it almost felt heartbreaking. They asked people to honor Robert by watching a good film, to tell a meaningful story over dinner with friends, or to take a quiet drive through the countryside. That was it. No red carpet farewell for a man who had earned the right to one of the grandest send-offs Hollywood could offer. And if you sit with that request for a moment, you begin to understand something deeper. This was not just a grieving family. This was a family carrying out the final wishes of a man who had spent his entire life resisting everything Hollywood tried to turn him into. Amid the tributes and obituaries, one detail slipped past most people. Robert Duvall had no biological children, no traditional heirs. He left behind an estimated fortune between $50 and $70 million, a vast estate, properties in 2 countries, and steady royalties flowing in from some of the greatest films ever made. And all of it was set to pass to one person, a woman he met by chance in a bakery in Buenos Aires nearly 30 years ago, a fortune worth up to $70 million, and an unexpected heir as of February 17, 2026. No official details about Duvall's will or estate plan had been made public. But under Virginia law, when there are no children, a surviving spouse typically inherits the entire estate unless stated otherwise. That makes Luciana Pedraza Duvall the presumed primary beneficiary of his fortune. What makes this story stand out is what is missing. There is no legal battle, no estranged children hiring attorneys, no secret heirs emerging from the shadows, no family members arguing over the will on cable news. The silence surrounding Robert Duvall's estate is almost absolute, and that silence reveals everything about the man he was. This fortune was built over 7 decades. It did not come from a handful of blockbuster deals. It came from consistent work, careful role choices, smart real estate investments, and a production company of his own. His company, Butcher's Run Films, named after a property he once owned in Virginia, generated additional income by producing films, including his deeply personal project, The Apostle. On top of that, royalties from classics like The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and Lonesome Dove continue to generate income year after year. He and Luciana also co-owned a boutique hotel in Argentina, a place they often returned to, together. These streams formed a substantial fortune, yet this man had no children to pass it on to. To understand Robert Duvall's philosophy on money and fame, we have to go back to the very beginning. Because the Robert Duvall the world came to admire was very different from the boy known as Bobby Duvall, who spent his childhood growing up on Navy bases. He was born on January 5, 1931, in San Diego, California. He was the second of 3 sons, raised by a decorated Navy admiral and a mother who quietly loved the stage. His father, Vice Admiral William Howard Duvall, was a highly respected officer who expected discipline, order, and obedience from his sons. His mother, Mildred Virginia Hart, was a gentle and reserved woman with a private love for acting. That family background carried a certain weight. But inside the Duvall household, it was the military that shaped everything. As a child, Bobby lived the life of a Navy son, moving from one base to another and never staying in one place long enough to truly put down roots. He studied at Severn School in Maryland and later enrolled at Principia College in Illinois. It was there that his future nearly went off course. His grades were so poor that his parents, desperate for some kind of solution, suggested he try drama classes. The idea was not born from artistic ambition. It was simply a way to help him stay in school and avoid being drafted into the Korean War. At that point, acting was not a dream. It was a way out. And yet, something happened in those classes that no one expected. The young man who could barely sit still in a lecture hall suddenly came alive on stage. For the first time, he seemed fully awake, fully engaged, and fully himself. He graduated in 1953 with a degree in drama, then served for a year in the Army at Camp Gordon in Georgia. After that, he made the decision that would quietly change the course of American film history. He moved to New York City and enrolled at the Neighborhood Playhouse, where he studied under the legendary acting teacher Sanford Meisner. The list of people around him during those years reads almost like a preview of a future Hall of Fame. Dustin Hoffman was his roommate. Gene Hackman and James Caan became close friends during those lean and uncertain New York years. These 4 men lived in cramped apartments, opened empty refrigerators, and chased impossible dreams while barely scraping by. At the time, none of them had money, and none of them knew for certain what lay ahead. Duvall worked at the post office, in a department store, and even drove trucks just to cover rent while continuing to audition. His breakthrough on screen came in 1962, when he was cast as the mysterious Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. He had almost no dialogue and appeared for only a few minutes, but his presence left a deep impression. In the final scene, the way he looked at Scout, beginning with something close to fear and then softening into warmth, held the audience in complete silence. That moment revealed something rare. This was not an actor who needed long speeches to fill a room. He could do it with stillness, with timing, and with the smallest shift in expression. One of the people who noticed that performance was a young director named Francis Ford Coppola. and Coppola remembered it for nearly a decade before making the call that would change both of their lives. When Francis Ford Coppola began casting The Godfather in 1971, the studio wanted major stars and safe choices. Coppola wanted Robert Duvall. He had already worked with him on a small film called The Rain People in 1969, and he knew Duvall had something unusual as a performer, something that could not be faked and could not be taught. What happened next is almost shocking in hindsight. Duvall was cast as Tom Hagen, the German-Irish adopted son of Don Corleone and the quiet consigliere of the family. For that role, in a film that would later be recognized as one of the greatest ever made, he was paid only $36,000. By modern standards, that amount is closer to the price of a comfortable mid-range car than the fee one would expect for a performance in a cinematic landmark. But what Duvall created in that role was worth far more than the paycheck. Tom Hagen was never the loudest person in the room. He never fired the gun, never delivered the grand speech, and never demanded attention. Instead, he sat at the edge of the frame, listening, advising, and calculating. That restraint became the power of the performance. It was precisely because he held so much back that audiences could not look away. The film earned Duvall his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He returned for The Godfather Part II in 1974 with a much larger salary. But when Paramount came back to him for The Godfather Part III in 1990, the relationship broke down. The studio offered him far less than his co-star Al Pacino, and Duvall refused to accept it. He looked at the numbers and decided to walk away. Years later, he said on 60 Minutes that he would have done the film if Pacino had been paid twice as much as he was. That, to him, would have been fair. But 3 or 4 times as much was not fairness. It was disrespect. He called the producers cheap and left the project behind. The film went on without Tom Hagen, and many critics later agreed that it suffered for that loss. That choice cost him millions of dollars. But it also revealed something essential about Robert Duvall, something many people in Hollywood never fully understood. He cared more about principle than profit, and that belief would shape every major financial decision he made for the rest of his life. After The Godfather turned him into a star, most Hollywood agents probably expected Robert Duvall to cash in with a long run of high-paying gangster roles. Instead, he moved in the opposite direction. He chose parts that no one expected, and that most actors would have been afraid to touch. In 1979, he stepped into the chaos of Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now as Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore, a military commander obsessed with surfing, and delivered one of the most quoted lines in film history. The performance earned him a BAFTA, a Golden Globe, and another Academy Award nomination. In that same year, the great Santini brought him his first nomination for Best Actor for playing a hard-driving Marine pilot whose personality carried an unsettling resemblance to Duvall's own father. Then came the role that lifted him to the summit of his career. In 1983, Tender Mercies cast Duvall as Max Sledge, a washed-up country singer trying to find redemption in a small Texas town. Duvall insisted on singing every note himself. He wrote that demand into his contract, and he even composed some of the songs when he won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He accepted it in a cowboy tuxedo and told the audience that he felt especially honored that Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, and Waylon Jennings had recognized his work. It was a moment that felt completely true to who he was, standing on the biggest stage in the entertainment world and caring more about the judgment of 3 country music legends than the opinion of the Academy. In 1989, the miniseries Lonesome Dove gave him the role he later called his personal favorite, Captain Augustus McCrae, a retired Texas Ranger with a philosophical soul. Tens of millions of viewers followed the story over 4 nights on CBS. Then, in one of the boldest moves of his career, He spent more than a decade developing a script called The Apostle, a story about a Pentecostal preacher on the run. When no studio wanted to finance it, Duvall put $5 million of his own money into the film. It went on to earn more than $21 million and brought him his 5th Academy Award nomination. That was proof that he was never acting just for a paycheck. He acted because something deep inside him demanded it. By the time his 7th and final Oscar nomination arrived for The Judge in 2014, he was 84 years old. 7 nominations, 1 win, more than 130 films, and a fortune that had quietly grown while the rest of Hollywood chased headlines. While most Hollywood stars poured their money into mansions in Malibu and estates in Beverly Hills, Robert Duvall chose a completely different path. He bought Burnley Farm in the Plains, Virginia, a vast estate in the heart of Virginia horse country. The property had once belonged to Washington Redskins owner Jack Kent Cooke. At its center stood a historic Georgian stone farmhouse, surrounded by horse pastures, rolling fields, and clear views of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Duvall did not buy that farm as an investment. He bought it as an escape. He and Luciana even turned one of the barns into a tango hall. The estate stretched across roughly 360 acres of rural Virginia, where he kept horses and lived far from Hollywood. Before that, he had owned another Virginia property near Purcellville. It was listed for $3.7 million in early 2024. The Stone Manor, originally built by Quakers in the 1820s, inspired the name of his production company, Butcher's Run Films. His decision to live in Virginia was not accidental. It was a statement, a concrete, physical rejection of the Hollywood lifestyle. While others chose parties, red carpets, and constant visibility, Robert Duvall chose open land, silence, and a community that did not care about celebrity status. Robert Duvall was married 4 times, and each marriage seemed to reflect a different chapter of his life. Each one also ended in a way that revealed something deeply personal about the cost of dedicating yourself entirely to your craft. His first wife was Barbara Benjamin. They married in 1964. She had 2 daughters from a previous relationship, and Duvall helped raise them as his own. The marriage lasted more than a decade before they separated. When asked what went wrong, Duvall offered only 3 words: everything faded. His second marriage was to actress Gail Youngs, his co-star in Tender Mercies. They married in 1982 and divorced 4 years later. His third wife was Sharon Brophy, a professional tango dancer. They married in 1991 and divorced in 1995. That relationship introduced Duvall to Argentine tango, a passion that would come to define his personal life beyond acting. And then, there was a moment that felt almost like something out of a film. Duvall met Luciana Pedraza in Buenos Aires in the late 1990s. She was about 41 years younger than him. He had gone out to buy flowers, but the shop was closed, so he stepped into a nearby bakery. Inside, he met a young Argentine woman who claimed she had no idea who he was. They later discovered they shared the same birthday, January 5th. They dated for years before marrying in 2005. Together, they built a life far from Hollywood. They lived on their Virginia farm, danced tango, traveled frequently to Argentina, and founded the Robert Duvall Children's Fund to support schools and hospitals for underprivileged children. But they never had children of their own. Despite 4 marriages, Robert Duvall never had biological children. He and Luciana considered adoption at one point, but it never happened. And so, when Duvall passed away in February of 2026, everything he had built across a lifetime was set to go to one person. Every dollar earned from The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Tender Mercies, Lonesome Dove, The Apostle, and more than 130 other films would pass to the woman he met in that small bakery. But in the end, the story was never really about money. The tears his family shed were not for the fortune he left behind. They came from the realization that a man who could have lived like royalty in Hollywood chose instead to spend his final decades on a horse farm in Virginia. He danced tango with his wife, fed cattle, and watched the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains. He turned down millions for the sake of principle. He spent his own money to make films he believed in. He never chased fame, and he never sold his private life for public attention. And when the time came to say goodbye, he asked for no spectacle, only a quiet departure. Al Pacino called him a natural actor. Francis Ford Coppola mourned the loss of someone essential to everything he had built. Viola Davis said she was in awe of the sheer scale of his performances. Across generations, actors paid tribute to a legacy that felt almost impossible to measure. And yet, perhaps the most meaningful tribute was not spoken by any famous voice. It was the family's request. No funeral, no memorial. Just watch a good film. Tell a story. Take a drive. That is how Robert Duvall wanted to be remembered. Not through tears over wealth, but through simple, human moments. The very kind he spent his entire career bringing to life on screen. He once said he was prouder of a typed letter Marlon Brando sent him after The Godfather than of his Oscar. Think about that for a moment. A man with 7 Academy Award nominations valued a single letter from a fellow actor more than the golden statue the entire industry chases. And that is what stays with you long after the story ends. Robert Duvall built a fortune worth tens of millions. Yet the people closest to him did not mourn the money. They mourned the man who earned it, because he could never be replaced. No amount of wealth can fill the empty chair at the head of that farmhouse table. The tango hall in the barn will fall silent. The horses will graze without him watching from the porch. Wealth was never the goal. It was only the byproduct of a life lived on his own terms. A life where truth mattered more than fame, principle mattered more than profit, and love mattered more than convenience. The tears his family shed were the kind that money can never buy and can never prevent. That is the real legacy Robert Duvall left behind. Not dollars, not property, not royalties, but the quiet, powerful proof that a person can live entirely on their own terms and still leave the world wishing they had stayed just a little bit longer.